Yo, what's up guys? New video, not necessarily a tier list, but tier list will probably be made when the whole meta is more developed, things are more certain, like what's countering what. Like even without a balanced patch, the meta still kind of rotates around. But in this case, I kind of wanted to check, like, okay, what are the win rates? We've seen the China tournament, we've seen some units being used a lot there. For example, Ganymedes, Woosas, Chiwus. We didn't see some other units being used that much, so for that reason, and we have also a whole bunch of LD5s that are heavily buffed, like the Wedjat, the Lora, Bella's decently buffed, Veronica nerf, all of those kind of things. I kind of just want to check, address, where are the win rates at? We have some nerfs coming in, and interestingly enough, I'm going to look at Guardian and up. I'm going to look at 4v4, so that means 4v4 means what happens after the ban, so if anything is banned, it doesn't include that, so it's only what are the 4 units on the field in that case. And I'm also gonna look at Guardian, but Guardian 3, I already noticed with Guardian 3 Plus there's not too many matches, because Guardian 3 is currently filled up with like, I probably assume like 150-ish people. So it doesn't have too many matches, so the numbers here fluctuate a lot more, depending on like who plays a lot, depending on like what has been used, and depending on like the wind of the day pretty much. So with that, few things we see interestingly enough, is if we check by pick rate, Moore is the most picked unit, more than Oliver is the most picked unit. Which is actually pretty interesting, because we had a very strong Oliver meta, where Oliver used to be 75% pick rate, or up of that, having like 52, 53 win rate we've seen him at. We've seen him actually drop in win rate by quite a bunch. In G3, he is still the most picked unit. In the 4v4, actually his win rate is also slightly below 50. It is somewhat common that units that are often picked are below 50 win rate. But another very interesting unit, which we also saw, which was very much used in China Cup, which didn't have that great of success, which was Shizuka. And I didn't actually count the number of how many times Shizuka lost, but I really felt like in China, Shizuka had a pretty bad win rate. And they use a lot of Ganymedes, and maybe the Ganymede plus the Olivers plus other unit CPs in their Despair CPs, they used a lot in there as well. Maybe they handled the Shizuka really well. Or Shizuka's just handled pretty well because her S2 is a lot worse right now. Because normally you could S2, you kind of cycle turns and skills pretty fast, but now she kind of lacks that. And, you know, honestly, you can disagree with me, but I really feel like that Shizuka is still a pick where if you pick it as being first turn, it doesn't really do too much for you. If you pick it as second turn, you are kind of somewhat preying on like, I need to resist on the Shizuka, I need to proc out on the Shizuka, or he is just too low on AoE CC kind of stuff that he cannot deal with my Shizuka. Either one of those 3. If the opponent draws properly into you, it's only either one of the first 2. You need that resist or you need that proc out, and otherwise Shizuka's not gonna do too much. That is my opinion about Shizuka. That's also why she never really worked for me. I guess maybe I drafted her wrong, I don't know. But mine never really seemed to resist or proc out. So I always kind of said, if you feel like you say like, hey, Shizuka is a very good unit for me, you are probably slightly on the lucky side. But that's my opinion on that. You are definitely allowed to disagree on that. Interesting unit besides Shizuka that we did see quite a lot was Juno. And Juno did do pretty well. And interestingly enough, if we check the win rate of Juno in G1, it is a little bit above 50. For the amount of pick rate that she has, it's actually the highest what we see here. But if we go towards G3, she becomes a 52.31 on the win rate. And I do somewhat on, and that's actually only when she's in the match. When she's banned, she doesn't have that value. So that's interesting for a few factors. I do think Juno is one of the more difficult units to rune properly. You need very good Despair runes, you need very good Revenge set, and you need very good artifacts to make her work, where she actually deals a lot of damage while being tanky, while having some defense, while having some accuracy. She's actually one of those units that kind of needs everything. And Juno is very strong in current meta. And if I'm not mistaken, I checked the win rates of G3 right now. Once again, keep in mind G3 win rates kind of fluctuate a bit because there's not too many matches in. But she's the highest win rate non-element unit with a very high pick rate. So that is pretty interesting fact to see, because we have a bunch more that have pretty decent win rates or pretty good win rates, but none of them get close to that 52 and none of them have like a 30% pick rate. So that is definitely an interesting unit that if you didn't pick it up in your team yet, probably want to look at. Another unit which also was seen a lot in the China Cup was the Cheongpung. Cheongpung 51 win rate, which is pretty high, especially if you see, for example, more is kind of lacking. Mostly the two of them are paired. But let's see if it's not in the match. Still pretty high. Let's see in G1. So a little bit lower in the G1. However, Cheongpung, I wouldn't necessarily say that Cheongpung is definitely harder to rune, because most of the times you see certain units shine more in G3 because they are harder to rune. But maybe it's harder to set up for G1s or maybe below that even. So that's a pretty interesting take as well. And I'm not sure how you guys run it these days. Mine is still on Vio. The S2, S3 potential is still pretty hard. But in the China Regional Cup, we saw a lot of them despair, if not all of them despair. So that was definitely a strong unit. Interesting factor we've also seen was the Racuni Miles combination. We saw a lot of Racuni. I think Racuni is a very strong unit. However, his win rate doesn't really represent that. And I think that's also maybe because it's slightly overspammed in situations where he doesn't really fit. Like, people are literally first and second picking Racuni Miles. I think in lower ranks, probably if we check like Conqueror ranks, we do see higher ranks with that because technically they are easier to rune. The moment you get towards the Guardian rank, your Racuni and your Miles are still going to be kind of the same, maybe slightly bit faster, but they don't really value from being a lot more tanky, or they don't really value for doing more damage because Miles damage is just that speed. At some point you kind of have a threshold for how good a unit is. And that's kind of nice reflected within these win rates in here as well, where Miles is like top dog in here. Even Shizuka still is, and probably if we go for the Juno over here, it's a little bit less, because in general those units are harder to rune. But in here, they get a little bit less good, and also they have to deal with more LDs in higher ranks, which is also a pretty big factor. Like, the more LDs you have to deal with, the harder it is for some units to shine, whereas, for example, Juno is actually pretty good into a lot of LDs. Fun fact as well, Ethna, which is used a lot, is also kind of representing of a unit that has somewhat lower win rate, but still doing pretty well. But also kind of struggles, and I'm pretty sure the lower you get in the ranks, the lower... No, it's actually not that our win rate really gets that much lower. So, because I would say Ethna is also a pretty difficult unit to rune in general. Looking on, funny enough, we have like the first LD. The most used LD is Nephthys at the moment, but at a 51 rate. So she's nowhere near like super high. I'm first going to look at some normal elements, and then we're going to look at the LDs, because the LDs, there's actually a lot to talk about them as well. So firstly, I want to say about like Woosa. Woosa and Guardian 3, that's a pretty interesting high unit as well. Let's see if how much he shines in other... 50 in Guardian 1. I think the 53 is maybe like specific people using him at the moment. But Woosa is also something that was picked up a lot in China. They used a lot of the Chiwu, Gani, Hathor, Woosa combination. Sometimes without that Chiwu, without that Hathor, but still the other three combined. There were a lot of Woosas in there, which pretty interesting. Sekmeth still kind of same. I did see an interesting fact, and that's if you check the 4v4, and we go for the 4v4 for third. Third, the moment it's led through in the match, it is actually one of the most impactful units for normal elements for high win rates. So if you would check highest win rates normal elements, I cannot select normal elements only here, but I think the first one would be Juno, second one would be either the third, and then the third one would be Woosa, which is pretty interesting to notice in general. And afterwards you get Meo Wang, but it's a lot lower in pick rate. And yeah, that's also another high pick rate unit with very high win rate are both Slayers, which is Sagar and Karnel. Both of them actually have a very high win rate. But we also see some units, like this is for the example, Ganymede has a pretty high win rate too. Same for Abelio. Let's see how that shows in Guardian. If we go for Guardian, and let's keep it on the 4v4, doesn't really matter all too much. Verdio has a lot less win rate in Guardian. That's pretty interesting. Maybe it's one of those fluctuating win rates as well. We see an uprise of Masha. And Masha was actually nerfed. Masha was used quite a bit less in previous season. But I think she has an upcoming... I started using her a lot more in my last session. And she did very well. And I think that's definitely a unit that people should start picking up again. Funny enough, Nana, pretty high. But I was looking for Karnel. Karnel's a little bit less. Karnel is technically not necessarily very hard to rune, but Karnel is pretty hard to rune on a very good artifact set. Like the moment he has good artifacts, good runes, then he starts shining. Sagar is actually doing pretty well throughout all ranks. And Ganymede is a little bit lower here than in G3. So that is pretty much most of it for the higher takes of the higher end units in Guardian. And then for normal elements. But let's look at the lower end. So what's actually the lower end? People have been trying Ezio. Ezio, I think you really shouldn't use this in RTA. Main reason is every draft you have different turn orders. And he boosts one unit that comes after and attack bars to something else. It's very likely that this thing is going to attack by your Racuni or something stupid because they banned out something else. So you cannot really rely on this you can only rely on this in siege defense, arena defense, offense in both cases. But RTA wouldn't really use it too much. Do we see any interesting takes in here for win rates? Well, I think most of them are somewhat balanced. Jeogun, actually people did expect to have a higher win rate. Or that he did better or that he came back. But apparently not really. Sekmeth, it's kind of that... I think a lot of people throw in that Sekmeth the moment they feel like, hey, I am getting outsped. I have a Sekmeth, let's go for it. I don't think it's the right play always, so... For that reason, what do we see over here? Ooh, we see actually more interesting stuff over here. Let's actually switch it to 2% plus because 2% plus is actually what we kind of see more often used. Triton, apparently not a good unit. Sonia, I'm kind of surprised about Sonia being a 43.8. Once again, there's not too many matches of her, so it kind of might fluctuate, but I'm somewhat surprised about it. Same for Tomoe. Interesting enough, Sekmeth, also not that great. I think a lot of people tried Sekmeth on the Rage set. I've done it as well. It's pretty nice to a certain extent, but it is pretty difficult to... Like, most of the time, you're kind of like, lacking. Seara, funny enough, like, besides her lacking in win rate, she's lacking in pick rate. Like, no one even wants to play Seara anymore. She really fell off really badly. So, I do kind of hope that the Oracles get a buff again. They would have to exclude Juno from that buff because she's definitely would be overdone. Juno actually kind of deserves a nerf more or less. Maybe 1 turn speed buff instead of 2. I don't know, but give it some ideas, some thoughts. Thessarion is actually a pretty interesting unit as well because Thessarion is often picked as like, okay, I kind of have to counter passives. I kind of have to counter LDs. Yeah, that's a unit that does still struggle with it. Like his win rate is kind of reflecting that part is not easy. Funny enough, this is also one of the lowest win rates of Leo on the field. Because I'm pretty sure if we say like, okay, not on the field, but in the actual match, we do see a whole bunch of different numbers for the win rates. Like, for example, Sonia is, when it's led through, people are like, okay, I can deal with it, that doesn't win as much. And I think for Leo has a pretty high factor of winning the draft, but the moment he's led through in the match, he's not going to value that much, which is pretty interesting as well. So that's the most take for the normal element units. We still see Robos in there, that kind of stuff. Both of them. Veromos, actually, I think Veromos in the moment where he has a... or where he is picked and in the match, he becomes pretty high as well. But I'm just going to look at Veromos for a second because I thought he was pretty high. Yeah, 51.70. So it's Veromos. If he's in the match, it's actually really high. But now let's look at the LD5s. Because we have a whole bunch of buffed ones. We do see Bella at the top of win rate right now in the 4v4. She is once again on the lower pick rate, so take this number with a grain of salt. Could be one of two people, but I'm not gonna call names. One of two people like kind of boosting her win rate in there. But if we look at the numbers of 10%, 11%, and then with 57 and 56 win rate, we can claim that somewhat busted. Like the Nicki, the Lora, they got insane buffs. Shan still very high up there, but check this one out. Wedjat is 22.28% picked and 55.44 win rate. That is absolutely insane. That is wow. But Wedjat, I've mentioned it before also during the tournament. Wedjat is actually like a Vert with a speed lead, with healing, and with 2 anti-buffs. And then also a pushdown. Just buffing one thing on Wedjat buffed everything so much. Like, to be honest, Wedjat did really deserve a buff. But buffing this one specific thing buffed this whole kit like through the roof. Which is most likely gonna get nerfed at some point afterwards. I assume. I could be wrong on that. Let's see how he does in the Guardian 1. Wedjat Guardian 1. Jeez! 57. Like, he's a lot less picked. That's also why you see in Guardian 1 Plus, there's just less distribution of certain units. Like, half of the pick rate, half of the pick rate, half of the pick rate. But those win rates still represent that these units are insane. That is pretty funny. That's, wow. Yeah, a lot of people are first picking Wedjat. That's the interesting part as well. Because the moment you have a Wedjat, you're very likely to just first pick it because it fits as a first pick. Any speed lead technically fits as a first pick. So for that reason, it's pretty interesting as a unit throughout. We see some Light Monkey kind of making a return. That's interesting to see as well because Light Monkey kind of died out a little bit because of like fighting the passives, struggling against the passives. But he makes kind of a comeback even in G3. I do assume that he's better in G1 and that kind of stuff. Valantis still up there. Tian Lang, very high win rate, very high pick rate. 22%, which is almost as much picked as the Wedjat, which is pretty interesting as well. It does kind of make sense with Wedjat in there, with Verdi in there, with a lot of these units that actually give themselves attack bar. Tian Lang becomes insanely strong. Interesting factor is Veronica is still up there. A lot of people said like, hey, Veronica is absolutely gutted. The unit is trash right now. Cannot live without, like, after the 2-3 nerfs that she had. She's alive. She's well and alive, and she still does a lot of stuff, and she still is very good. The unit that I actually missed for the normal elements is Federica, or the Fire Cassandra. Very interesting unit, mostly played on the double Nem Will build that I also showed in the video yesterday. Very strong unit. Very, very strong unit. Abelio also pretty high up there. I do think that Abelio's win rate actually went up because he is very well paired with Wedjat. So the moment someone has Wedjat, let's see if we see like godlike width. I kind of expected Wedjat to be here on this list. Apparently it's not on this list. It's here on this list. So yeah, a Wedjat and then a Miles and then an Abelio. Totally not surprised to see that that is a very strong comp. So that is definitely a unit that I think will be picked up a bit more. Also, Dumon has a very high win rate. I think Dumon is a very dangerous unit to deal with if you have a bruiser comp. Funny enough, the strongest or the highest win rate, strongest I wouldn't call it, but the highest win rate Oracle is Lima at the moment. And that is pretty interesting. The pick rate is very low, so this doesn't really represent that this is stronger than that, that's for sure. But Lima's actually somewhat making a comeback, and I think Lima is somewhat making a comeback because she pairs pretty decently to pretty well with some of the other LDs out there at the moment. So for that reason, I think it's pretty good. People have said that Onimusha, the dark one, Ongyuki was gutted, but 51.55, but still pretty decent actually. Diana, pretty decent win rate. Neftis in the 4v4 on Guardian level is actually a little bit lower. Same for Seimei. Seimei, actually, the win rate of Seimei did take quite a hit. I think it was around 52, 53 win rate before, but maybe that S2 actually did gutted her. Or not necessarily gutted her, but hit her harder than I thought it would. We see Julian on a pretty high pick rate. I think Julian is probably somewhat overspent because people kind of want to use it a lot. I think his win rate should be probably 1 to 2 or maybe even 3% higher if people start drafting him where he should be drafted rather than first picking him, second picking him. If you make him as a good last pick or a good like 4th or 5th pick, I think this unit is definitely worthy of like 52 and up in win rate because the unit is very strong. I would claim it as one of the strongest bruisers out there. Let's see on the lower end, and funny enough, I saw this already before, Ragdoll in G3 is actually getting lower and lower. And the reason for that is because more and more units start getting counters into Ragdoll. Because, for example, the Federica is very good into Ragdoll kind of comps. And I think that's one of the contributions that the Fire Cassandra Federica actually does have very good potential into it. However, I did also see if we go for Guardian 1 and then we search for Ragdoll, Ragdoll has a way higher win rate. So that also does showcase that, well, either of two things. The numbers can still fluctuate because there's not too many numbers in the G3. And I think that G3 players are better with dealing with Ragdolls than G1 and up players. So that's those two factors definitely do make that number change. But that is pretty interesting in general. Someone was saying I do want to revert the Yeon Hong change. I think Yeon Hong is still one of the stronger units in the game right now. 53 on a 7.5. Probably somewhat lower in Guardian 1. quite a bit lower. Ooh, this one. Interesting to talk about as well in a second. Yeonhong, where are you at? Wow. Yeonhong needs good runes. Yeonhong needs definitely good runes to shine. Could be that the numbers kind of fluctuate, as mentioned before, for G3, but that is definitely something that's interesting as well. Let's see for the lower end of the LD5s. Giana is actually at the all-time lowest win rate ever. This is probably the first time I've seen Giana below 50%. And that is once again because there's so many units that we have the Heigang buffed again. Heigang is actually, he was very low in win rate, like 46, 47, maybe even 45. But that unit being buffed right now, and yeah, I think Giana is actually in the worst spot right now from all of the metas that she has been in. Would I necessarily say like, ooh, she's so bad she needs a buff? No, she comes by. Like, you know, honestly, like I'm the most well-known Giana spammer out there. But I feel like she still comes by. She's not gutted, she's not useless, she's absolutely usable. But she is a lot more harder to use because there's just so many other units that are... Every stripper in the game is technically faster than her. She has that 100 base. 100 base is actually one of the worst spots to be in, especially for strippers. Like, sure, some are lower, but 100 base is pretty terrible. So, yeah, for that reason, I think she does struggle a little bit more than some other units. Overall win rate kind of dropped a little bit. I think it's because of the Shizuka nerf. It was mostly paired with Shizuka. Chiwu win rate is not that high. I think it's a good unit, but it's still... Like, let's say you want to Chiwu into a Vert. Vert can still double crit, so... Makes things a little bit difficult. Let's see what kind of LDs we see at the bottom. We don't really necessarily see some LDs at the bottom. Maybe if we change the pick rate to something else. Let's change we change the pick rate to 1%, so that's why you see units that are barely used. Weirdly enough, Dominic super high up, but I think 1% pick rate kind of shows things that it's just a few people using that. A few people probably have like a super nice comp on that, and therefore it works, therefore it shines. If it's not above like 4 to 5, maybe even 6% pick rate, you cannot take the number all too serious because it's just 1 or 2 people using it, making it work. Someone was mentioning about the Dark Pudding. Dark Pudding, I think, is a pretty good unit, especially since that Oblivion is on a 2-turn cooldown right now. We've seen it being used by Lest. Lest actually put it on Violent. I did really assume that it is a unit that you normally put on Swift because you have to outspeed your whole team. The unit has a very low base. I thought it was 98, but someone actually told me it was 96. So you need a 96er on a Vio set that's faster than your whole team and also needs to be Will. That is a very good set to give to that unit. So pretty interesting to see that some people can make that Vio. I would assume most people throw that on Swift. And we do also see that over here. For Red, I guess, is also somewhat boosted because it's good with Wedjat. Maybe the same thing for Valajul. Jackson is pretty high up. We did see a bunch of She-House, actually both on Swift and on Vio. They had pretty decent value, but I still think that skill 3 has a 5 times 15% check to land, minus resistance, minus your just straight up 15 check from resistance. Landing that skill 3 is still somewhat difficult, I would see. Maximilian is 52 in G3, which is actually pretty decent, and Woyong is right next to it. It's a bunch lower on the pick rate, but both units show good win rates in here. So, once again, it doesn't mean that the highest win rate unit is per se also the best unit in the game. It doesn't mean that the lowest win rate unit is unusable. It is just like a reference of like, okay, how many times are certain things winning or not. And often, if something is winning more often, has a higher pick rate, has that higher ban rate, it has more value in the game as well. But can you just simply draft like 4 units that have the highest win rate next to each other and expect to always win? Not necessarily. Let's look at highest ban rates. And highest ban rate actually goes to Domon, which I think is very understandable. And Domon is very dangerous. So if you check it with and without the ban, 55% win rate. And I think Domon is very much underrated for the people that have her and don't use it that much. Because the moment you enter a bruiser fight with a Racuni, with a Mali, with like a lot of those annoying units, ragdolls, whatever, you throw her in, shit is bound to die. Shit is literally bound to die. And that is pretty strong. Wait, we have Laika on that high win rate. Pretty crazy. Well, super low pick rate, so same for these two. So that's pretty interesting in general. Someone was asking about Daniel, also not that much high of a pick rate. Funny enough, Eureka, that's mostly only a 5th pick, is actually not doing too well. Dark Cassandra is also not doing too well. Funny enough that the Dark Cassandra is so much worse than the Fire Cassandra. And the Fire Cassandra, it's just the passive. Because of the passive, she kind of, if you use her into a Moor, the Moor goes for an S2. Her Nemesis boosts up all of her A to B. She starts one-shotting a CP or an Ethna. Pretty solid unit for those kind of things, which is pretty cool. Dark Cassandra, definitely could need a little bit of a buff. So yeah, that is mainly talking about all of the units. So definitely, once again, wow, this one is super high up, but no one's really using that. So 2% and up, that's what we can actually look at. Interesting enough, we can see from the last balance patch that it actually shook up the meta, at least for the LD5s, very heavily. We have the Lora coming in as one of the best units right now. We have the Wedjat coming in as one of the best units right now. That's just insane. Like, these two units got really an insane buff. And there was one more that I forgot about. There's one more that also got a decent buff. I'm not sure where it was at. Maybe it's a little bit lower. Yeah, mainly these two units, they're very strong. Light Ivor. Ooh, good point, good point. That also got a buff. Let's see where she's at, because I don't think she has that much pick rate. That is probably her issue. Let's just look up the unit this way. I think this should still work, right? Light Ivor, because I think Light Ivor is pretty strong. I've seen some people use it. I thought it did absolutely no damage, but then I fought one in Siege and actually kind of one-shot my Rika. Funny enough, not that high on the win rate, so unit is kind of out there, but I think it's also the lower the rank, the better she probably does, because she takes a lot of turns, she stuns a lot, all of the kind of stuff, so that's, yeah, G1 plus, pretty strong, G3 plus, apparently not that strong. So yeah, that's definitely the take on all of those units at the moment. Can we just simply reset this? Oh, the reset button is over there. Funny enough, we have a lot of those normal units that are picked a lot on relatively low win rates. But we see a lot of those LDs right now. That's the thing, like, everyone is asking for their LD to be buffed. But the only way that that happens, if their LD is buffed, what does that mean? Well, that pretty much means that it's going to be an LD heavy meta. And that is kind of what we're having right now. If you look at the numbers of the picks from the LDs, it's pretty high up. And we have some LDs with very high win rates. The Nicki, the Lora. Damn. Those three units are very, very strong right now. Wedjat, you see Wedjat, and I think you're going to see a lot more Wedjat. And especially Wedjat, keep in mind, we are going to have the 2As on the Frankensteins and on the Living Armors. Both of them are heavy defense scaling units. If one of those is slightly suitable for RTA, it instantly becomes a very strong pair with Wedjat. I have seen people that used Bulldozer Wedjat like a year, 2 years ago already. I really wouldn't be surprised if that becomes a thing after we get the Living Armors for the 2As and the Bulldozers, well, Frankensteins for 2As. So yeah, that's pretty much my take on those. I hope you enjoyed this video. A little bit different than a tier list. Once again, tier list is going to be made later. But this is just like a little bit of a quick interaction of saying like, okay, what units are out there right now? What units are good? Maybe you have certain units in the storage that you were like, oh, maybe I should start using this. Or maybe you see a bunch of units that you feel like, okay, yeah, I am kind of forcing this unit in a lot. It does kind of show that it's not the highest of win rate. Maybe I should draft this a little bit less. So those are just the kind of takes that you can take from this video. Of course, these statistics do not necessarily say like, okay, if the Nicki has a very high win rate, it doesn't mean that you can spam Nicki into every comp because she is still susceptible to AoE CC and a whole bunch of other stuff. But in general, she would do good. So that's kind of the thing, like you cannot say like, oh, high win rate unit, gonna draft it in, I'm gonna win 60% of the time with it right now. Definitely not the case. You kind of need the good comp around it, the good draft around it, good runes on it, all of that kind of Gucci stuff, so keep that in mind. Guys, thanks a lot for watching, and see you in the next one.